Hey everyone, and thanks for watching 3dmotive.com. My name is Cordell Felix, and on this video, I will show you how to use the Turbosmooth modifier. Turbosmooth is used mostly for its effect it gives a high poly model. It helps a model look smooth by subdividing its geometry and averages angles between every polygon. There are other ways to smooth a model like the Mesh Smooth modifier or HSDS, but those aren't as quick and efficient as Turbosmooth. I will be using 3dsmax 2013 for this quick tip, and this video assumes that you have a basic knowledge of modeling in 3dsmax. This mech shows a couple of examples of how I use the Turbosmooth modifier. One of the reasons I like to use it is because it can help me quickly concept a model out without having to spend too much time on it. I modeled this entire mech just in 2 hours by doing some low poly shapes and then throwing the Turbosmooth modifier on top. Then I used the FFD modifier to shape them. I'll show you some examples now. Before we start using the Turbosmooth, I want to first show you how to set it on this menu so it's easier to grab instead of going through this list every single time. So click this configure modifier sets button here and then click configure modifier sets. Then it'll bring you to this menu here. So you can select the amount of buttons that you have, like I can add more here, and these are just modifiers. So you can search through this list and grab whatever modifier you want and just throw it on here if you want. So you just drag and drop. So my normal amount is 12 and I have all these are all just modifiers that I use the most. And so if you want to copy these, you can if you want. So to go to Turbosmooth, just click in here, type TU, and then it'll bring you Turbosmooth, and just drag that onto your first one or wherever you want, and then click OK. So you have to make sure that you have show buttons enabled. Now if I throw the Turbosmooth modifier on, it's going to subdivide it, and it averaged all the angles out, and it tried to smooth it out as best as possible, which made it into a ball. I can throw the iterations up a little bit higher, and it'll smooth it out even more. And this is some other things I want to get into. So the iteration count is just the amount that it subdivides it. And if you go past 3 iterations, that means that you're just getting into a really high poly count and you really don't need this much detail into your model unless you have that detail to support it, like a bunch of edge loops and just small micro details. 3 is a good number for this little sphere because it's small and it's already pretty low poly. So there's this other cool button called Isolating Display here, which basically makes your wireframe look a lot nicer. So if I go back to my mech here, you can see that he looks really smooth and like just really sharp. That's because I have isolating display on. If I have isolating display off, you'll see a bunch of his wireframe. It doesn't look as nice. You know, that's not really pleasing compared to this. So I only use isolating display just for viewing purposes. I wanted to grab this piece off my mech because I did some cool tricks using smoothing groups. So let's go ahead and isolate them out. Okay. I have a turbo smooth applied and I have the smoothing groups option turned on. This allows the mesh to smooth only in the low poly smoothing groups. It does a really good job of smoothing it, and it gives it a nice hard surface look. If I had the option turned off, it turns it into an organic model, and I didn't want that for this mech. The smoothing groups option allows me to quickly throw a turbo smooth on a low poly model without having to do any support edges, and that way I can still get a smooth model which still has some sharp hard surface shapes. And I'll show you how I set my smoothing groups real quick. So I'll delete my turbo smooth. And all I did was I selected faces like this, and I just hit clear all, auto smooth real quick, and then that set it for that. And I just did that for each angle. If it's something like this, you might have to select or make this about 60, so that way the angle it smooths at is a little higher. So then now that'll be smooth. With this mesh, I'm going to show some tricks with soft selection and an FFD modifier to get shapes that would be rather difficult to model or just take forever. I'm going to apply a Turbosmooth, and then if you go back to the editable poly stack and then you click the show end result button right here, kind of looks like a Roman numeral 1, and it'll show you what your stacks are above, and you can turn it off and on with the light bulb here. And I have my show cage turned off. If you have show cage turned on, it'll be like an orange thing that goes around it. It kind of gets in the way of what you're trying to do or what you're trying to see. So I have some edges selected, and then I'm going to have this show end result on. And then with that, I'm going to have the soft selection turned on. And then I have, let's see here, that's probably a good amount. With those edges selected, now I can do whatever I want with those edges. I can make a nice little bend and kind of turn this into like a sci-fi looking pillar. And then if I just go back to the Turbosmooth and turn off wireframe, you can see it looks pretty nice. Another way I can do this is I can go back, I can add an FFD modifier. So I'm going to do a 4x4, and then I'll just go here and select these middle ones. And then since I have the show end result on, I can just bring these all up and kind of do whatever I want with this mesh. Make into, let's grab these ones up here, turn it into like a S shape, I guess, something like that. And cool, now I can make this like a nice tail or something for my mech. Make it into a modular piece. And just a quick note when you're using the Turbosmooth modifier, you need to have these control loops that support edges and make them sharp. Because if I didn't have these edges and I have this Turbosmooth, you're going to get a very soft kind of crease here compared to the rest. So I talk more about that on my Swift Loop tutorial for 3dmotive. It's one of the first videos I made for them. So you want to watch that if you want to understand how to use Turbosmooth for high poly modeling. When I work with a Turbosmooth, I never usually collapse it into an editable poly because I never really need that much detail. Like I can't mess with this anymore or anything. I don't need this much detail because I can just bake this into the low poly. There might be some cases where you could save out and convert this into editable poly. Like you can go in here and select every other loop and then delete those to get a bit of a higher poly version of your low poly. But one thing you never really want to do is you never want to have isolate display on when you collapse into editable poly because it doesn't collapse the model very well. If I go into vertex mode, you can see that I have all these floating vertices, and this is something you just don't want to mess with. So you try not to collapse your stack when you have isolate display on. Most of these little tricks help me make this mech really quickly. And if I just go to this little part right here, you can see that I copied this from this part right here. And a lot of the time I just did the 4x4 modifier and I just scaled parts up. So if I can just go like this, and bring this part out, maybe this will rotate and go out. Maybe I'll also create a swift loop, give it an extra edge, bend this a little bit. Then I can just throw Turbosmooth on here and it'll look fine. Do smoothing groups. So it's just stuff like that that make this whole mech come together really quickly. That's it for this quick tip. My name is Cordell Felix, and thanks again for watching 3dmotive.com.